When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Grease Comedy YouTube channel. Today's video, we are going to be doing a Targaryen Kings ranked video. So, we're going to be going through 1 through 17, ranking every single Targaryen king. Now, I think I've done this before, and we've also, I know, done live streams about this before. But as I feel like my knowledge increases on A Song of Ice and Fire, and I go back through topics, learn more about some of the more, I would say, forgettable Targaryen kings, sometimes these lists change. And I think specifically with certain characters that maybe I ranked a little bit lower, they get ranked a little bit higher, things just tend to switch for me. I think the top kind of stays the same, and the bottom more or less kind of stays the same, but that middle ground is where I think is very interesting on what Targaryen kings do I put above others. And I will not be putting in Robert, Tommen, Joffrey. I just don't want to put them in this. I just want this to be Targaryens. So again, let me know what you guys think on some of my rankings. I know there's going to be some controversial ones in here, and we'll get there when we get there. But I'll be curious to see what you guys think. Also, I want to point out, if there's other information that you guys think is relevant to how I rank a king or how you rank a king, let me know. I will say I am much more knowledgeable on, say, the kings that take place in the Fire and Blood era. So kind of after, I would say, like, Daeron II. My knowledge is not as great, but we'll get into it. And that's because we don't have as much information on those kings. And Fire and Blood, which is one of my favorite books, it's right there. I read a lot, so yeah, I just have more knowledge into those. But yeah, if you guys think I should be considering some other type of information on a king, let me know. And also, I want to kind of put up the parameters for what I'm going to be ranking these people on. So, I'm going to be ranking them on how efficient were they as a king, what policies did they put in act, what did they do for the realm, what was their impact. And I know some people rank these kings based on, if you were a common person, how would you feel about these kings? That's not how I'm doing it. I'm doing it as, if you were a Targaryen and you were trying to keep the dynasty going, you were basically in the family, whatever, how would you rank these kings? That's how I'm going about it. What did they do for the Targaryen dynasty as a whole? So you'll see as I get further down my list, well, we're going to start at the bottom anyway, but when we get to some of these people are ranked closer to the bottom because they almost destroy the Targaryen dynasty, or they end up doing it. So there's that point of it, and then also just kind of their impact. Did they have a lot of peace during their reign? Was there a lot of violence or war? That's another parameter that we must take into account. And I think the last one is, how long did they reign? Because there's certain people that we know that if they had reigned for a long time, probably would have been great kings, but they ended up not really having that long of a reign. So let's get into it. And we're going to start at number 17. So at number 17 to me has to be the Mad King. He was an awful king when it came to later in his realm, or in his reign. I know early on with Tywin, things were actually pretty good. But again, this is the king that destroys the Targaryen dynasty. Robert's Rebellion should not have won. The fact that it won shows the Mad King's incompetency. He also, again, got the realm into a massive civil war that killed thousands of people. He is someone that just is incompetent. The coffers, when Robert Baratheon takes back the throne, they are full, basically. How was this threat that, you know, Robert Baratheon posed not taken seriously until maybe the very end when Rhaegar is supposed to lead the armies to the Trident? It's just a complete mismanagement of the situation. So he has to be the last one for me, because no matter how bad the rest of these other guys were on here, none of them completely destroyed the Targaryen dynasty like the Mad King does. Also, you don't get a name, the Mad King, if you weren't a terrible king. So that gets us to number 16. Now, number 16 is kind of similar to the Mad King, but it's Aegon IV, the Unworthy. This king, I think, has dropped a couple spots for me since the last time I did a Targaryen one, but he is just completely incompetent. As I, learn more about the Blackfyre rebellions, especially the first one, I've gotten really interested in it. His complete mismanagement of the situation, and he was a king that really did not care. He is someone that didn't really think about any political decisions. He's someone that set up the wars, the Blackfires, and that all that to happen for thousands of people to continue dying, and again setting up the Targaryens to now have a rival and a problem that they will face for generations. He was just a terrible king. Gives away the ancestral sword of Blackfire, which was Aegon the Conqueror's sword, to someone that, again, would have posed a threat to the throne, especially when you had Aegon IV peddling things like Daeron II being a bastard, that it was actually Nerys and Aemon the Dragon Knight who were his parents and not actually him. You had him making all of his bastards legitimate at the end of his reign. It kind of just it seems like a fuck you to the rest of Westeros. He was so fat that he couldn't get up. He couldn't do his duties as a king. He was just a disgusting person, just in general. He was just filled with lust and greed. He was not a good king on really any level. He didn't stabilize the kingdoms after he left, and he also completely mishandles the situation with Dorne, and he sets, again, this path of the Blackfire Rebellions where you have one side that's like kind of pro-Dornish, the other side that's anti-Dornish. So that is my reasoning for number 16 being Aegon IV. Now, number 15, I don't know if people have this one as low as I do, but I think Aenys Targaryen is one of the worst Targaryen kings. He is weak. He does nothing. He lets basically anyone go in rebellion and does absolutely nothing. He gives the faith everything they want and really just allows them to run over him. He is a weak king. He is the very definition of what a weak king is. And Aenys was so inefficient that even with the dragons, he nearly cost the Targaryens their dynasty. When Maegor comes into power and he's the one taking over, the Targaryens are in a really bad state, right? You have Aenys' heirs. They're basically trapped at a castle right now. And again, Aenys is this person that sets up a ton of bad shit to happen. He is someone that is completely incompetent. He's just not willing to take action, right? Like, think about how many rebellions were going on. There was one in the Vale at this point. There was one with the Dornish. There was one everywhere, it feels like. You had the Faith Militant basically running rampant right now. The Faith Militant and the Faith as a whole were saying, basically, Aenys, you do what we say, and that's how things are going to go. Again, not great. And especially right after Aegon the Conqueror, where you need to continue at being a firm king, he fails in every aspect. And I think there's going to be some people that will say, okay, well, this king or this other king was a worse person. They did more atrocities. The Targaryen dynasty nearly died after Aegon. If it wasn't for Maegor being the complete opposite of Aenys, they would have lost the Targaryen dynasty, in my opinion. So again, I think another character that was very detrimental to the Targaryen legacy, and again, in my opinion, definitely harmed how the Targaryen dynasty progressed, right? Because we should have seen things that Jaehaerys was doing in Aenys' reign. It kind of got kicked down the can. Even Maegor implements some things that Aenys should have been doing way earlier. So that gets us into my number 14. So again, I want to preference this. This is not the Viserys from the TV show. This is the Viserys from Fire and Blood. Now, what we're getting from Viserys is that he's a complete pushover. He's incompetent as hell. He doesn't even particularly care about ruling. And what does he do? He fills this massive hole of who is going to be the heir to the throne. He kind of says Rhaenyra, but then he doesn't, back Rhaenyra. He doesn't, cement that Rhaenyra is the heir in really any regard. He lets it fester because he doesn't want to piss off anyone. He's very similar to Aenys in that way. Aenys wanted to please everyone, and that's just not possible all the time. Viserys is someone that all but allows the Dance of the Dragons to happen. He has vast corruption in his reign. The only thing I can say that's positive about Viserys' reign is that he had peace during it. He continues the peace of Jaehaerys. But even saying that, he is pretty much the sole reason that we see the Dance of the Dragons, quite literally the worst conflict in probably the Targaryen history in Westeros. Basically, this is the event that kills the dragons as well. So again, Viserys in many ways is responsible for all of these events. And I won't say he's as bad as someone like Aenys, like Aegon, like Aerys, because Viserys, in my opinion, this does happen after his reign. So I guess, again, it's one of those points, but it's similar to, say, Aegon IV as well, where all the bad stuff happens after. But Aegon was even more incompetent than, say, someone like Viserys. And I'm the same way there with Aenys. I think Aenys is a even more worse version of Viserys in that way. And that's going to get me to number 13. So number 13, again, this is a House of the Dragon spoiler, so just going to throw that out there. Aegon II. So Aegon II is a pretty poor king for a lot of reasons. Aegon II was not a king for very long. He was only the king through the Dance of the Dragons, and at points he wasn't even king then. He is king a little bit after the dance as well, but he's such a bad king that he ends up getting poisoned and killed because he wants to basically continue the war. Any of the houses that supported the blacks, he wants to punish them, keep the war going instead of making peace. Corlys Velaryon is someone that kind of ends up going to Aegon's side towards the end, just kind of seeing how the war is going. And he's someone that says, you know, we should be making peace. We should be marrying, say, Aegon III, Rhaenyra's at this point that we know of, right? You know, eventually Viserys comes back into the picture, her other son. Let's unite the claims, right? Unite the green and the black's claims. And Aegon is unwilling to do that. He is a terrible king when it comes to fixing the war and then, again, cementing the Targaryen dynasty moving forward. And he gets killed because of it. I think it shows a lot if you are killed by, you know, your small council because of how dumb you are. And Aegon II is kind of a perfect representation of that. If we were going to throw Rhaenyra on this list, because, again, she was sitting on the Iron Throne and she was the queen for a time, she would be probably right here as well. Both were terrible rulers during this time period. Number 12, Aerys I. Now, Aerys I, I don't remember where I ranked him the last time I did this video, but as I look into him more, I find out more information about him. You know, since that point when I read that, I had read Dunk and Egg, and Aerys I is someone that is just really not wanting to be king. He doesn't really have any role being king. He's someone that's kind of similar to, say, a Robert in the idea that he doesn't really rule. He lets other people rule for him. Now, Aerys and Robert's personalities are vastly different. Aerys is kind of more of a bookish type guy. He is not a warrior or anything like that. And what we're told here is that really Bloodraven is the person ruling, not Aerys. And that's not the worst thing in the world, that Aerys understands he's not a good king, so he lets Bloodraven do it, but I can't inherently rank him as a high king if he didn't do anything. And even when we see all that happening, 2 Blackfire rebellions happen under his nose. So it's not like, oh, there was a great peace during this point as well. There were other things happening. We have a bunch of Greyjoy raids as well. I think without Bloodraven being his hand of the king, again, I think Aerys I could have been detrimental to the Targaryen dynasty as a whole. And he is very lucky he had Bloodraven, in my opinion. So that's going to move us on to number 11. Now, this is a very interesting one, because I think Daeron the First Targaryen is someone that's remembered really well. You know, we see him being talked about with Jon and Robb when they're talking about people, you know, that they want to be, or just, you know, pretending to be people. Daeron is someone that gets brought up, and he's remembered kind of fondly. But the thing is, Daeron the First Targaryen inherently wasn't a good king. He was not someone that was good. He didn't really do much as a king outside of start war on Dorne, again, getting thousands of people killed. And in the end, it was kind of a pointless invasion as well. They didn't really take or hold Dorne. So that was really pointless in my opinion. He got a lot of people killed for really no reason at all. And also, this kind of set the stage for the first Blackfire Rebellion, because when we get to Daeron's rule, one of the main things is we see with Daeron's line that they are married into the Dornish. They are very connected with them. There's a great peace that's trying to happen. But the rest of Westeros doesn't really like the Dornish. Why? Well, because they've been fighting the Dornish for generations. And when you look at this point, when Daeron's basically asking people to make peace with the Dornish, you're basically saying, oh, well, what about all of my, you know, father, uncle, brother that died on Daeron the First's invasion of Dorne? not good. That's something I didn't even mention with Aegon IV and his failed invasion of Dorne that went laughably horrible, where not even a single Dornishman was probably even killed. Invading Dorne just is not a good thing. It's just kind of a stain on his legacy, and I can't put him below some of the worst kings we have on here, but Daeron inherently did nothing really good for the kingdoms and all of that. So getting into number 10. So I put Baelor the Blessed above Daeron, and we're kind of getting into that land where this is really where Viserys II is really just ruling. Viserys II is, again, the last son of Rhaenyra, and he is one of the people that if he had been king the entire time he was Hand of the King, he would have been a great king, in my opinion. And the issue here with Baelor the Blessed, he was a lunatic, in my opinion. He was not good for the realm. What he was good, and why I think he's higher than a lot of other kings on this list, is he made peace with Dorne. He had a fairly peaceful realm during his reign. But the issue here is that he didn't really further the line of the Targaryens. Again, he stays... He basically stays celibate. He doesn't, sleep with or the wife he was going to have. He even locks them up later on, which... not great looks, and especially when we look at this time for the Targaryens, where there's not a lot of Targaryens at this point. He really didn't do a great job of, basically spreading that line. When we look at that, the line is now, later on going to go through Viserys, and then Viserys' line, he just didn't do a lot of great things for Westeros, in my opinion, outside of just keeping peace and making peace with Dorne. And that's about it. So that'll move us on to number 9. Now, this is going to be a very controversial pick. I know a lot of people are not going to be pleased with where I put this person, but I think Maegor the Cruel is number 9. I think Maegor gets a very bad rap from the Maesters. I think Maegor did a lot of good things, but he had to get a little bit dirty to accomplish them. Let's think about Maegor when he comes into the throne. You could say, yes, he usurped Aenys' son. But at the same time, Maegor is this person that comes in and he was basically saving the Targaryen dynasty. He was the one helping put down these rebellions. He was the one that put down the Faith Militant, which was going to be a huge issue for the Targaryen dynasty that he did. He is the one that basically establishes the Red Keep. He is someone that basically takes over and builds on Aenys' incompetence and fixes a lot of those issues. One of the key points here that I don't think is made on Maegor's case is that when Jaehaerys comes to the throne, he is set up so perfectly. Maegor paves the way for Jaehaerys to have a very smooth reign. And yes, Jaehaerys does have to, fix things after Maegor's reign because of the atrocities that Maegor does do. That's not something I'm going to argue. If Maegor wasn't as cruel as he was, he would be higher on this list, but because of the atrocities he did, because of the harm he did to people, for sometimes no reason, it feels like, that's the reason he's so far down this list, kind of in the middle of the pack area. He didn't really he didn't get into that top 5 area. This is why. But to me, he is the person that saves the Targaryen dynasty. Without a Maegor figure, the Targaryen dynasty falls. This is a character I've been heavily invested in and learning about, and I think he gets a really bad rap. And someone like Aenys should be the one that we remember much worse than Maegor. So getting into number 8 is going to be Aegon III. And Aegon III is a very hard character for me to rank, because he is a king that inherently had peace during his reign for the most part. He was a fairly decent king when he actually came into being the king. Again, early on when he wasn't old enough to, have the kingship by himself. There was a lot of corruption going on with Lord Peake at that point. But when he finally comes into rulership with his brother Viserys, the throne does pretty well. I think the one massive negative we see here with Aegon is that Aegon didn't like dragons. Aegon didn't want any more dragons hatching. He didn't really want that. And the dragons die out during his reign, which is a massive negative for the Targaryens. It was one of their biggest sources of power, and this dies out on Aegon's reign. So that's something I have to put into effect when looking at Aegon as a king. But I think overall, he was a better king than everyone really below him. I think there was maybe potential for some of the people below him to be better. But I think Aegon III is fine here. I think right in the middle of the pack is where he probably should be. I could see people arguing that he should be lower, maybe down to like 11 or a little bit lower just because of, again, him losing the dragons during his reign and his attitude towards the dragons, but I think this is a fair placement for me. So number 7, I think this is another surprising one just because he wasn't king very long, but Jaehaerys II. So this is the Jaehaerys we see right before the Mad King takes over. His reign was only 3 years, and that's the negative, right? If Jaehaerys had reigned longer, I think there's a great chance he could have been a little bit higher on this list, but he only reigned 3 years, but we're told they're quite effective. And this is the massive difference with Jaehaerys, is that Jaehaerys, when there is this black fire threat with Meleys the Monstrous on the Stepstones, he doesn't wait for Meleys to invade Westeros. He doesn't wait for any of those things. He takes the war to them and ends their line. That is a major accomplishment for Jaehaerys II, and something that I think needs to be attributed to his name, something that was really good. He also did a great job in trying to repair the relationships with the High Lords, who again were not pleased by his father Aegon V's reign. Aegon was someone that the people really liked, but the High Lords didn't, and there's a lot of reasons why. Aegon kind of tended to focus on the normal people, the common person, not the higher lords, the richer folk. And you also have some things where there's some broken marriage proposals and stuff like that with a lot of the High Lords. So again, Jaehaerys went about fixing that situation and making such a easier reign for the Mad King when he first took the throne. And something I think that really shows how he could have been a fantastic king was that Barristan notes that he was an extremely competent king. He was kind of looked at, Jaehaerys II was kind of looked at as a character like, say, Aenys, where he was weak. But that was kind of like his physical conditions. He was kind of weak in that point, but he was a very strong-willed individual. He was very good, and he was someone that was great for the kingdoms. So the only knock for me with Jaehaerys II is that he didn't reign longer. If he had, he would be higher up. Now, number 6. This is another weird one where I don't know how people are going to feel about this one, but we have Maekar. So Maekar Targaryen is someone that I don't think he was really fit to be king, but even when he was king, did a pretty good job. Maekar, to me, is the closest thing that we'll see to, say, Stannis being a king. Maekar is this person that's very stern. He seems someone that's very similar to Stannis in personality. He's more of a warrior type and kind of a soldier, not exactly a king. But when we look at that, Maekar is someone that reigned for 12 years, and he had a ton of peace for majority of that. The only real thing we see during his reign is there was a peak uprising, and that is actually what ends up costing Maekar his life. But outside of that, Maekar, again, reigned fairly peacefully. The kingdoms did well under Maekar for the most part. They had a long summer. I think it was about 7 years. So again, Maekar had a fairly good reign, and there's not really a lot of negatives I can take away from Maekar. Outside of Maekar was not someone that could make friends that well. Again, very similar to Stannis. He was somebody that maybe wasn't the best political player either, and that may be why you would put him down lower. But I think what happens during his reign, the peace that was there, I think he's fairly good when we look at a lot of these other kings that struggled with keeping peace. That gets us to our top 5. So Aegon V to me is number 5 here, and I think the reason he's number 5, he is someone that just didn't really get the balance down between the nobles and the common folk. He didn't really balance that out well, and it really got him to be a very resented king by a lot of the higher-ups. And the issue with, supporting the common people is that, yes, that's good, but the lords are the ones that kind of have a lot of the power. The nobles have a lot of the power. And when you don't have them backing you, it kind of leads you to a really sticky situation. And then you also look at the end of Aegon V's reign with Summerhall being this big tragedy. Aegon was kind of pushed to, I think, desperation with the way his children had been not following his commands. And Aegon V did inherently a lot of good stuff, a lot of things that were very progressive for a Targaryen king. He was trying to end the incest, which didn't go well. His children didn't really listen to him. And Aegon V's, I think, biggest weakness outside of how he dealt with nobles is that he didn't really do a great job with his children and making alliances and strengthening the Targaryen dynasty. And I know that's not completely on Aegon, but because, again, a character like Jaehaerys I is someone that's very similar to Aegon in that manner. He is kind of has this weakness, and I know it's a very human thing, but when you're king like Aegon and you're trying to keep the Targaryen dynasty going, you really do need these bigger alliances. We see how important they are, especially look at the Blackfire Rebellion, how important marriage alliances are. Aegon, not only does he not get these marriages, but they were proposed and accepted, and then they fall through. It insults. It's like a stain. It's very much like, say, Walder Frey, where he's supposed to marry, or where Walder Frey makes a pact with Catelyn that Robb is going to marry a Frey girl. That doesn't happen. That happens like 4 or 5 times during Aegon's reign with his children. So, again, he was a good king, and he had a lot of great interests, or he had a lot of good ideals. He was going about certain things really well, and he was very progressive for this time, but he just wasn't the best when you look at, I think, the next 4. So number 4, I have Viserys II. Now, you guys may be thinking, whoa, Viserys II did not reign very long. He was not someone that had enough time to be in this top 5. And that's where I'm going to make an exception, because like I talked about with some of these other characters like Baelor, like Daeron, he was someone that, in my opinion, deserved to be in this top 4. Because he was really the person helping rule and was the person ruling for over 40 years, and the kingdoms did fairly well under his guidance and his rule, I think he should be top 4. I think if he had been the king for, that whole period, he would have been remembered as one of the greatest Targaryen kings, very similar to Jaehaerys. I think he's the closest to Jaehaerys that we ever get, outside of maybe some characters like Aegon and Jaehaerys II. He is someone that, and even Daeron II, I didn't mention him in there, but I think he is someone that is the most overlooked Targaryen king, probably in Westeros. And I'm very interested to see if, we get more stories on the Targaryens and like the House of the Dragon stuff, how Viserys II will be kind of portrayed. That moves us into Daeron II. Now, he is going to be my number 3 pick for a few reasons. Daeron II is someone that always preached peace. He took a lot of that from Baelor. He just didn't become a lunatic. He is someone that I think in a lot of ways knew how to compromise with people really well. He had a lot of great reforms. He did a lot of great for Westeros. The one big stain we look at for Daeron is that the Black Fire, the first one anyway, happens during his reign. And we also do see that there was probably a little bit of corruption in Daeron's reign, especially at the beginning of it. And he is someone that was faced with a really tough task. His father, Aegon IV, one of the worst Targaryen kings, set him up to fail. There was constant rumors of his parents, not being Aegon IV, which was detrimental to his claim to the throne. He had issues with how do you settle peace with the Dornish but keep everyone else happy, and he had some fallouts there, right? He does too much, in my opinion. He doesn't treat everyone like how he's treating the Dornish. The Dornish are getting special treatment, which it kind of makes sense. They're the only kingdom that Aegon the Conqueror and the Targaryens were not able to conquer, but he was giving them special rights, right? The entire small council and a lot of what was going on with Daeron's camp was with the Dornish. There wasn't a lot of else of representation, say, from other kingdoms, and that's definitely a fallout. But I think Daeron, he handled the Blackfire Rebellion fairly well. It could have been better. His Hand of the King kind of screwing him over for a while in the beginning of that war. But even after that, I think he does a very good job of how he handles the Blackfire Rebellion and the rest of his kingship. And I think he was a very good king overall. Number 2 is Aegon the Conqueror. You can't really make a top 5 without Aegon in it. Aegon is not really remembered for his ruling, but he had a fairly peaceful reign. He does try to invade Dorne. It doesn't really go well, and then he backs off. But again, he is the person that sets the precedent for what a Targaryen king should be. He is someone that, for the most part, sets up the Targaryen dynasty to do pretty well. Aenys doesn't really help that at all. I think Aegon, for being the first Targaryen king, is someone very similar to, say, like a George Washington for the United States. Just does a really good job of setting what a Targaryen king should be. And that, to me, is why he's number 2. He also does conquer Westeros and unites them, which is pretty good as well. Number 1 is Jaehaerys I. I don't think there's a debate here. Jaehaerys had the longest reign of any king on here. He had peace throughout really the entire thing. The amount of things that he put in motion, how progressive he was as a king and getting things done, how he was able to settle conflicts, how he was able to deal with people that maybe were a threat to the throne, flex the dragons, but don't, use them, don't go that Maegor the Cruel route. He was someone that completely understood how to rule. His only main flaw, which is something we see with Aegon V, was his children. He wasn't the best at, having good relationships with them, while also setting good marriage alliances and stuff like that. That was really his one major flaw, in my opinion. And it helped that Jaehaerys had Alysanne. We could kind of put a slash, Jaehaerys / Alysanne. They were both incredible rulers. They did so much for the kingdoms. And that is my list. So let me know which ones you disagree on. This is not the right list. It is just mine. So if you guys think that one king should be lower or higher, or if you guys think I just got it right, let me know what you guys think down in the comments. And I will see you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.